Victorian forefathers, what we found was a kind of holistic vision for arts and culture in the city. Its importance in terms of civic pride and economic prosperity, but also in terms of cultural pride and vision for the future for the city. So I feel really proud that, having only taken up the role as director here in April, one of the very first major exhibitions that I can open is Ford Madox Brown, who is perhaps the greatest 19th century adopted Mancunian. He isn't from Manchester, but he is a very, very important part of the cultural history of this city. And this is an extraordinary exhibition, which I'm going to allow Julian to talk about rather than say any words about it myself. But what I do want to say is that it's tremendously important for us as the city's art gallery to be presenting the most comprehensive show of Ford Madox Brown's work. It's tremendously important to us that as we have this extraordinary show in the gallery spaces, we're also able to open up the town hall to the people of Manchester, because those of us that work for the council get to see the murals quite often. But it's amazing how many people in Manchester never ever get inside the Great Hall and see that extraordinary effort of 19th century.
One of the ideas behind this show, and also reflected in the title, Pre-Raphaelite Pioneer, is that Ford Madox Brown got to that position of looking backwards and painting pictures that drew on earlier art a few years before the formation of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And indeed, he was a kind of mentor to Rossetti and to some of the other artists. But I'd also like to emphasise that once he had done that, and they looked up to him and listened to him and admired his pictures that were inspired by the earlier art, the movement developed, and the ingredients which we, all of us, I think, associate with Pre-Raphaelitism, very tight, detail painting, brilliant colours, very, very naturalistic landscape. All those things developed after a year or two. They weren't there in the initial ideas of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, and that kind of evolution was a sort of group thing. I think that Brown, Rossetti, Hunt, they worked together in the sense that they exchanged ideas. I mean, they painted their pictures separately, but they often talked about Ruskin's ideas, which fed into their ideas about naturally. I don't know whether you have ever been to the Oxford Union, where Rossetti and Burne-Jones and a few other Pre-Raphaelites painted murals which disappeared within months. They just faded. But Brown had that grounding technique, and also in large-scale painting. They were in the competitions. They were asked to submit cartoons. That's not a funny. The meaning of that as a comical drawing began in the Victorian period. A cartoon was a preparatory drawing. This is a fragment of one of the preparatory drawing that he submitted for this mural, this is a watercolour reduction of it. And the cartoon itself was 5 metres high by 3 metres wide. This is the head of this guy probably. And so you can imagine how big, this is a fragment of the original cartoon, which was falling apart in the 1960s, so whoever owned it then cut it up and sold it. And he was very impressed with the Holbein. This picture, which hasn't been seen since 1865, is a portrait of James Bamford. Maybe it looks very ordinary to you, but Brown wrote of it. This is the first evidence of an entirely new direction of thought and feeling on my part. He'd seen Holbein and was very impressed by that unflinching realism, and I think that's reflected in this portrait. This picture, the Seraph's Watch, which is a rediscovery, it just turned up, luckily, 2 or 3 years ago. We all thought it was lost. The Seraph's Watch, which was painted immediately on return from Rome, and he also retitled it when it was exhibited, A Reminiscence of the Early Masters. You see the blue that you get in Italian frescoes and the generally pale coloration. It may not be the greatest work of art that he produced, but it is tremendously interesting. Unlike a lot of the pictures, like this one for instance, this was never retouched or recoloured or fiddled around with. It's absolutely pristine. And then we have a series of pictures about the origins of English literature. This one is Wycliffe. This is slightly dirty now, unfortunately, because it was originally, I'm sure, much more originally it was described as fresco-like, so it's probably quite pale, but Brown did colour it up to heighten it. But to me, this is a reminiscent. This is an altarpiece. This is a secular altarpiece with Wycliffe, who's the great theologian, reading from the Bible. But it's not a religious subject in the sense of a biblical subject. He chose Wycliffe as he chose Chaucer because they created English literature. They were the first people to write in English. The translation of the Bible that Wycliffe did, which predated by centuries the King James Version, and also Tyndale's, and again, the Pretty Barlands. Well, the title itself was offensive because it was deliberately baby talk. This kind of, today, artists, young British artists, they overturn everybody's expectations every 5 minutes by, the equivalent, whatever the modern equivalent of using baby talk is, or using comic strips, I don't know what. Brown was not working in an established mode. This is a landscape with figures. She's in 18th century dress. Why is she in 18th century dress? Not quite sure, although my theory, explained in the catalogue, is that he was saying, 18th century landscape is not all frivolous rococo shepherdesses. It can equally be starkly realistic. This picture is held by art historians to be the first painting where figures and landscape together were painted out of doors so that you get a unified light. The Pre-Raphaelites did paint out of doors, but the Hireling Shepherd and Ophelia, the figures were added in the studio. They left a sort of big white hole in the middle and filled the figures in later. Here we get Brown painting them together, and you get this incredible strong, unflattering strong light, and you also get colours, bluish, purplish tinges in the shadows, which, you read a standard history of Impressionism, it says they were the first people to notice the use of complementary colours in shadows. Well, they weren't, because Ford Randall first. They've been on holiday, in fact, he often puts himself in a picture. That's Brown, his wife and daughter, and sharp eyes will notice there's two field mice there. Sort of expatiate. Well, Brown wrote he was descanting upon the sea, explaining the scene, and the field mice doing the same. Brown used humour to leaven the seriousness of his art. He didn't preach like Holman Hunt did. He had serious messages, but there's always a lot of fun and wit and satire. Brown, in the notes that he wrote for his exhibition, he did a big exhibition in 1865 of his own work, and in his diary wrote very illuminatingly about his art. Not these landscapes, each one of them was deliberately showing a very precise light effect. 3 p.m. on I think it's October, 3 p.m. on an October afternoon when the shadows are lengthening and the sun is catching the leaves which are changing colour. I paraphrase, not the exact quote in the catalogue. And this one, I don't know whether he wrote about it, but it shows, again, long shadows in a September afternoon, from his diary when it was painted, with this extraordinary, limpid, clear, distant view that you get on those summer days, with the rainbow.
What I'm going to have to take along is you can't go back through the text without I can't go back through the full line. There's no way to do it.